Okay, good morning, everybody. We're, of course, continuing our discussion of Dogen Zenji's Makahanyaharamitsu. So last time we went over this section that reads, this monk. So Dogen Zenji's gone into talking about this monk in the assembly of Shakyamuni Buddha. The monk realizes now that by venerating and making prostrations to all things, he is venerating and making prostrations to Prajna, which teaches that even though there is neither arising nor extinguishing, there is arising and extinguishing. And we talked, pretty extensively about that. This is something that is a theme, of course, that comes up over and over again in this sutra or fascicle and all over the Prajnaparamita teachings, of course. And this is, one of the sort of basic points of Dogen Zenji's teaching. So I won't go into it, of course, again, the way I did last week, but basically we know that everything, of course, is from one perspective, one life. We all are living the same life. And when we examine the boundaries that separate us from each other and from this reality, this kind of collective reality, they disappear. So everything, everything is connected to everything else. Everything is always changing. There's no person or thing that has some essential separate nature that's unchanging and is not connected to everything else. So from that perspective, we realize that everything is one reality, one body. This illusion of this separate person that can do what they want and get what they want, uh, as opposed to what someone else wants. This idea of competing and wanting to make sure that this person is taken care of first is delusion. We can't practice, we can't awaken, we can't eat, we can't breathe air, we can't speak without our connection to all beings, without this connection to this reality of all beings. And so it's this, of course, means that this is an illusion, this separate self of mine, and this separate self that I see in you and all other beings. It's an illusion. And we study this. This is why the Buddha taught what he taught. He studied this deeply, the kind of process that goes on in the mind and body that creates this illusion of a separate self, this kind of I making, he called it, that thinks that there is a subject here and an object there. And we need to manipulate that object in order to get what we want or avoid what we don't want. The Buddha said that is the root of suffering. So these are, very fundamental emptiness teachings, of course, Prajnaparamita teachings, and we find the root for these teachings in what the Buddha, taught. I often talk about this Kaccayana Sutta. We'll see if we get to that today. Usually I like to, the last several talks I've been sort of putting into this document the different approaches that Dogen Zenji is taking here and how they relate to this Kaccayana Sutta. So we'll see if we have time for that today. But, of course, the other point is that the Buddha taught these things to sentient beings. When we know that there are no sentient beings, then we can understand that there are sentient beings. So we see other beings as a provisional reality because of compassion, because of suffering. The Buddha was awakened, and he was, as I often talk about, he said, I'm not going to teach this because no one's going to get it. But in the early suttas, we hear, Indra coming to him saying, please teach, because there are sentient beings that will understand this. And to me, that was his heart opening when he saw the suffering, or he thought and he considered about the suffering of other beings. He couldn't just say, well, I'm going to sit back and enjoy my own understanding that there are no sentient beings, there is no suffering, and there is no reason to worry. For him, there was complete peace and understanding. And yet, to me, this is my interpretation. I wasn't there, so he didn't tell me what he was thinking. But when he settled into this peace, the thought of sentient beings suffering, arose in his mind, and he could not settle down into his peace without some disturbance out of compassion for other beings. And that's why we have these teachings, because his heart opened and he realized that other beings are suffering, even though they don't really exist. So then he, on some level said, well, they do exist. If we understand that they don't exist on the way that we think they do, they don't exist independently as something separate from this reality, then we can say they exist as a provisional means to manifest compassion. And so that's what Dogen Zenji, is saying here. This monk is saying that the monk realizes that by venerating and making prostrations to all things, he is venerating and making prostrations to prajna, which teaches that even though there is neither arising nor extinguishing, there's no arising of sentient beings and there's no extinction of sentient beings. There is arising and extinction of sentient beings. So, from one perspective, there's no birth and there's no death, because everything is just kind of recycled. There's the conservation of energy and mass or whatever. There's no way to take even a drop out of this reality and add it somewhere else, because everything is included in it. And yet, of course, as our personal experience, this body ages and this body gets sick. This mind becomes disturbed. And even though this suffering is empty and it doesn't really exist as we think it does, it's there in our life, and we address it out of compassion for ourselves and for others. The part that we're on now says, this moment of veneration is called nothingness. The approaches to nothingness thus become practical. This venerating is the most profound prajna paramita, subtle and difficult to fathom. This monk, when he understood this reality that no sentient beings exist, and yet sentient beings practice, and we need to venerate sentient beings and address suffering, even though they don't exist, that this reality is beyond existence and non-existence. Our suffering is completely healed, and then we're also given a way to address this suffering. We understand that our suffering is empty, and then we are given a way to relieve our suffering and the suffering of others. And that made him want to venerate this reality, the prajna paramita. Make offerings to we talked about bowing, how bowing practice, this veneration, this word here really means, venerating all beings through making bows. And we talked several weeks ago about making prostrations and its relationship to practice. So, Dogen Zenji is saying in this moment of honoring Prajnaparamita, of making, prostrations, this is a awakening. And this is the way of relieving suffering of all sentient beings. So it's kind of a amazing statement, even though we talk about it all the time. One, the unique way that Dogen Zenji understood this, that this emptiness, this prajnaparamita, is manifest in the moment of practice, and there is no awakening in the future that we need to grasp for, to seek after. We simply here and now manifest this awakening in our practice. And this is one of the things, that he's talking about here. And so he talks about this, he always talks about, or very often talks about this in terms of time. At the very beginning of this fascicle, he said, the time of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, seeing the emptiness of the five skandhas, is awakening. So the time, that means now. That there is no time but now to manifest this awakening of Avalokiteshvara, and this moment of veneration is awakening. It is Avalokiteshvara. It is Buddha. It is Prajnaparamita. So when we study time, we understand that the future hasn't come yet, and the past has already gone. And so all we have is now. And this moment of now has no length. It's this present moment has no past and future. Therefore, it's ungraspable too. There's no way to measure this time of now. And so this time of now is completely connected with all beings in the past and future. The only reality is now. And in this moment of now, that's why this veneration now permeates through all time. So it's very difficult to understand this intellectually. But when we do this, when we 100% do it, we don't need to understand intellectually. We just manifest it. So, and yet, well, first of all, let me say this, that go back to this sentence that Dogen Zenji presented here in this part. He says, this very moment of veneration and prostration, Prajnaparamita manifests itself in practical approaches such as precepts, meditation, wisdom, and so forth, until saving various sentient beings. So, earlier he talked about practical approaches. Practical approaches are things that we do. It's the precepts, it's meditation, it's ringing bells, it's giving Dharma talks, it's the Buddha saving sentient beings. It's something we do in this moment of here and now. So one thing he's saying here is that this is our approach to practice, is when we sit zazen, when we ring the bell, or when I give a Dharma talk, this is a veneration to all beings, to emptiness, or to Buddha. This is a prostration. If I give this Dharma talk as a way to feel good about myself, or think that I'm doing a good job or whatever, that is not, that's not practice. That's delusion. That's, being steeped in the subject-object relationship of trying to get what I want and manipulating you or me or, that my words or whatever, in the service of this delusion of an individual self. But, when Lacey rang the bell this morning, that is a practical approach that allows everybody to settle down and say, this is Zazen beginning. So we do that. We ring that bell as a manifestation of venerating Prajnaparamita rather than, something else. So this is the one thing he's talking about here is the attitude of practice. If we practice in order to get enlightened and to be better than others and be wise or great, we're not, it's the attitude of making a vow. What attitude arises when we make a vow? It's gratitude for this opportunity to practice that this entirety of all beings has given us in this moment of now. It's gratitude and honor and complete connection with what we're doing in the here and now, going beyond the subject-object, relationship of manipulating something to get what we want. So that is the main, one of the main things that he's saying. He's telling us what is the approach to practice that we adopt to really manifest this Prajnaparamita. And so, the amazing thing, of course, then, is that he says that this sort of delusion of a separate self that we need to have to make a vow or to ring a bell becomes emptiness. These practical approaches that are complete delusion, if we do them in a self-centered way, become Buddha or become are a manifestation of Prajnaparamita. And actually, without these practical approaches, there's no way to manifest awakening. There's no way for a runner to run without running. And there's no way for a person to awaken without displaying the awakened activity of ringing a bell. This is our human life. We have our individuality from this perspective, but we understand our individuality is no individuality. Therefore, we have individuality, and we're able to give a Dharma talk. If we don't say there's anyone there other than me, there's no reason to say anything, of course. There's no reason to practice. But the thing we don't understand is that these practical approaches, these things, this is a old Zen term that means things that, are, that usually a Zen master comes up with in order for people to, practice, like koans or, some kind of, Dharma activity, something that is you do that you can attain, but what is, the thing is this is the non-attainment within attainment. What is being attained is the realization of beyond the individual and beyond the collective, our shared life, our universal life, that includes us individually and yet includes us as nothingness. So, anyway, I'll go on to the next line here. There's only 3 lines to talk about. So he says, this moment of veneration is called nothingness. So he's starting to play with words here and, go into his typical poetry that we can't understand really with the mind. So this nothingness is it's a translation of mu, and that's the way, this is an old, Chinese term. I can't remember what the Chinese word actually is. In Japanese, it's mu or no or nothing. So this is kind of a strange translation, but nothingness, it means non-existence. This goes back to this Kachayana Sutta. U is existence and mu is non-existence. So nothingness is really, it's kind of a strange translation. It means emptiness or nothing. Nothing exists, non-existence. So this moment of doing a prostration or ringing a bell is called nothing, is called mu. It means complete unity is manifest through this individual activity. A complete contradiction. It's something akin to form as emptiness, of course. This is what form and emptiness means. Form is nothing but emptiness. That means when we ring a bell, that's a form. And emptiness is manifest in that form. There's no emptiness outside of ringing a bell. There's no emptiness out there aside from our life. So this is talking about a certain perspective. I kind of wanted to talk about this in relation to this very famous part of Genjo Koan. So this very famous part of Koan, of Genjo Koan says, of course, all things coming and carrying out practice enlightenment through the self is realization. The other line is conveying oneself on all things to carry out practice enlightenment is delusion. So conveying oneself onto all things is delusion to carry out practice enlightenment. Here he's saying, this moment of veneration is called nothingness. So I think that means all things coming and carrying out practice enlightenment through the self is realization. This is the perspective of, we don't sit zazen. Zazen sits zazen. You can't sit there and do zazen. The zazen is doing zazen. All beings, we can't practice without the trees here. We can't practice without the air. We can't practice without our mother and father. We can't practice without, all of this is a gift. This entirety of Indra's net is manifesting here and now. And we have very little say in it. We're completely dependent on our connection to all beings and all things in this moment of Zazen. So, Zazen is really doing Zazen. We don't do Zazen from this perspective. So all things in this Dharma world manifesting here and now in our practice is realization, with the realization of nothingness or interconnection or impermanence. That is Zazen, does Zazen. So the next line, though, The approaches to nothingness thus become practical. The approaches to this unity, the form of sitting upright, the bow that we make, we are able to practice only because of those things. When we ring a bell, we have to pick up, the bell and do it. Even though, without the tree that made the striker and without the person who made the bell and without all of those things that went into the infinite number of things that went into making that bell and making us alive in this moment, if we don't actually say there's a bell and ring it, no ringing happens. So, this is carrying oneself out onto all things to carry out practice enlightenment. And usually this part of Genjo Koan, we think that's delusion. The Dogen Zenji is saying this goes beyond delusion and enlightenment. This moment of practice goes beyond the dichotomy of delusion and enlightenment. So in a sense, we use this delusion that there is a bell separate from us in order to express enlightenment. And therefore, this moment goes beyond delusion and enlightenment. The separation between samsara and nirvana is just an idea. It's just a concept. That's the whole problem. The whole problem that we have is we don't believe this life is Buddha. We don't believe this moment is Buddha, or we don't believe this moment is God, or emptiness, or Indra's net. We don't believe it. And, but when we simply settle down into it, we don't have to believe it. We just manifest it. And we let go of this, separation between delusion and enlightenment, sentient beings and Buddhas. And we just practice and venerate this reality beyond dichotomies. So, this, I think, is conveying oneself towards all things to carry out practice to enlightenment. We have to make some effort to go to the Zendo. And so Dogen Zenji says here, this is delusion. And it is. There is no Zendo. Zendo is just a name that we put on this place. Before we moved here, it was a bedroom. And, we could take out the altar and put in gym equipment and it would be a gym. So there's no essential nature to this room. But when we practice, it becomes the reality beyond, Zendo or gym or, bedroom. It's just now manifesting. So it's a kind of delusion to say this is a Zendo even. But if we don't have anywhere to practice. We don't have any way to express this reality beyond dichotomy, without the dichotomy. So this brings us to the next line, which says, this veneration is the most profound prajnaparamita, subtle and difficult to fathom. That's why he says this is subtle and difficult to fathom. I would say so. That's what this means. There's no way to understand this. There's no way the mind can really understand the fact that we need delusion in order to express enlightenment or to express this reality beyond, delusion and enlightenment. So, in this piece in Genjo Koan, I'm trying to connect these pieces because they're very much related, Genjo Koan and Makahanyaharamitsu. And we'll study Genjo Koan some point. And we'll probably come back to these pieces, but, in Genjo Koan, after he says these two things about delusion and enlightenment, he says, those who greatly realize delusion are Buddhas. That means those who greatly realize practical approaches are Buddhas. Those who greatly realize ringing the bell or making a prostration, that is Buddha arising in the moment, using delusion, so to speak. Those who are greatly deluded in realization are living beings. We're always living in this emptiness, or this reality of nothingness or beyond self and other. But when we grasp to our individual self and think that it's real, then we're deluded within this realization. Realization doesn't, emptiness or this reality doesn't really care if we're deluded or not. I mean, it's just what it is. And we can do anything we want, and it's still going to be the reality. But this person will suffer, of course, if we don't live in accordance to this reality. This person will suffer and cause suffering for others. But we cannot escape this reality of non-self or non-duality. We never escape that. And then Genjo Koan, he says, furthermore, there are those who attain realization beyond realization, and those who are deluded within delusion. So, this realization beyond realization means beyond existence and non-existence, beyond delusion and enlightenment. Just now, as I said, there is no, you can't say anything really. It's beyond this dichotomy of trying to figure out if this is a sentient being or a Buddha, or this is a Zendo or a bedroom, or, this is the individual, or this is unity. And that's exactly what the Buddha said in that Kaccayana Sutta, that when we see with the highest wisdom the uprising of things, we don't get caught in non-existence. And we see with the highest wisdom the falling away of things, we don't get caught in non-existence. This highest wisdom just here and now is beyond existence and non-existence. And of course, there are those who are deluded within delusion. Those who are invested in this self, believing in self and other, and invested in competition, or believing that things are real, and this separation between us is real, and manipulating it. Deluded within delusion, within this reality of practical approaches, using that to manifest delusion, this delusion of separation. Okay, so I think I'll stop here, and we have a few more minutes to see if anybody has any comments or questions this morning.
I was thinking, Sensei, that one of one one important question in my practice is trying to understand the meaning of zazen, of just sitting, because from one perspective, uh, it's like zazen is just sitting, and it sometimes it seems that that's enough. But like studying this text is like just sitting gets much more meaning when we study this text. Like if just sitting is the whole shogenso in a sense, or that when we can explore the meaning of just sitting, and that's interesting because it's like, I'm so sorry, like, but from the first time zazen, the experience of zazen is like boredom. That word exists. It's I like
Boredom.
bored, like, oh, when this is going to be over? This is so, I don't know how to say
Right.
it.
Yeah, bored.
uh, or anxious, like wow, somebody must sleep, like the bell, what happened to the bell, the one that has to ring the bell just sleep. And many things can happen in the beginning of practicing zazen, and it's like it's so great to see. I think, but it's like my question is like, Dogen is trying to explore the meaning of just sitting with this kind of text as Makahanyaharamitsu, or something. Like I feel that way. Like wow, this actually in a sense happened in Zazen practice, especially in intensive practice. Like we can feel in some sense that Zazen is a way to venerate the whole reality or something like that. But I don't know if my point was clear, or if make any sense. Like I'm so sorry that I cannot express myself in a clear way. Like for me, it's like just sitting is like so just sitting, so nothing happens. But through years, like just sitting is like just sitting, the whole universe, or something like that. And it's really simple. It's just like let's zazen, practice zazen. But what does that mean? It's like, okay, study shoguns in a sense, but I don't know. I that's like my impression today, sensei. My observation, question, comment. I don't know.
Yes, thank you, Ryushin. I think it's, a good point when we sit and, especially before studying anything, it seems like, completely the opposite of what Dogen Zenji is talking about. It seems like just, I mean, there can be pleasant experiences come up, but this understanding of the real depth of our Zazen practice is not an intuitive thing. And that's part of the reason Dogen Zenji really emphasized studying. And as I often say, a human being is an intellectual being. Some teachings in Zen say we need to negate the intellect. And that is not Dogen Zenji's teaching at all. We need this intellect in order to be a human being. We need the intellect in the way that a bird needs wings. But if the problem is, of course, is that we usually uh, worship this intellect. We don't understand that this intellect is just, um, it's not the reality. We usually make it an idol. We make it something to worship and say, this is the reality. That's the unique kind of difficulty of a human being, I think. I don't think a bird has this problem. and yet, we really can understand what it means, to fly in Zazen, or to, really go beyond, um, this individuality, this suffering, and this separation. When we study these kinds of things and then sit. We study these things in order to study Zazen. We don't do Zazen in order to understand these things. That's an inverted view. We study in order to encourage ourselves to sit Zazen and understand the importance and the meaning of it. And to me, I think, when we begin sitting Zazen and we start having some, kind of faith that we don't have to worship our intellect, we start seeing this reality when we're off the cushion. We start settling down and our faith kind of grows because, I see that I'm not the same person that I was 10 years ago. And I'm almost completely different person. And yet I think I'm the same. And if I try, so if I grasp that, if I try to be the same person or I invest myself in being the same or trying to be anything that's stable and unchanging, that causes suffering. But the simple teaching that, everything is always changing, and yet there's some way that it's also the same, this reality we see in our life. So we don't have to cling so much to one view or the other. We start seeing the simple emptiness of our own suffering. Oh, I'm feeling depressed today. Wait a minute. Yesterday I felt pretty good. A few weeks ago I was depressed, and then wait a minute, I was depressed one day, then I was ecstatic the next day. Then maybe just my mind is always changing, and I don't need to worry so much about any particular state of mind as being who I am. That's emptiness. But usually we say, "Oh, I'm suffering. Life sucks. Woe is me." Or life is great. I'm feeling in a good mood, and some little part of us knows that it's going to change, and we're not really, when it does change, we suffer if we try to cling to that state of mind. So yeah, I mean, one of the sort of gifts that Zazen gives us is to see the emptiness of our own life in our own mind. And so we don't have to grasp the boredom. Sometimes in Zazen, we are very bored. We sit enough Zazen, we might have a bliss state where we feel like we're enlightened or something, and we have no problems. And if we cling to that, we're going to be, some people like Zazen, believe it or not, I mean, sometimes it can be, and it's okay to enjoy it, it's okay to enjoy Zazen, but many of us don't, overall, and yet we can't, really live without it once we start doing it. We know that it's, our life. But the point is not to like it or not like it, of course, but it will offer us gifts, if we devote ourselves to it. Okay, thank you, everyone. I hope to see you again soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.